This is The Critical Thinker, Episode 5. Hi everyone, welcome to Episode 5 of The Critical Thinker Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Delaplante. In my day job, I teach philosophy at Iowa State University, but at night I produce content for this podcast and the affiliated website, criticalthinkingtutorials.com. where you can find video tutorials and a blog on various topics in logic, argumentation, and critical reasoning. The tutorials on the website teach what you might call the technical parts of logic and argumentation. Definitions of key concepts, how to recognize good and bad logic, fallacies, and so forth. The focus of this podcast is more on what you might call the existential parts of critical thinking. What does it mean to live, as Socrates put it, an examined life? And why should we try to? Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But more and more, I've come to appreciate just how challenging and demanding living an examined life can be. It's not obviously true that the kind of life that Socrates advocates is as important and valuable as he thinks it is. So in this first series of episodes, what I've been wanting to do is to talk about this question: why does critical thinking matter? And work my way through some reasons why I think it does matter. In episodes 2 and 3, I talked about how critical thinking skills can help serve our individual self-interest. In episode 4, I wanted to appeal to more social and political values and talked about the importance of critical thinking for sustaining forms of government that respect human rights and individual freedoms. Today, I want to branch outward again and talk about the importance of critical thinking for philosophical thinking and the pursuit of, let's call it, philosophical wisdom. Now, much of what I'm going to say here is probably obvious to anyone who studied philosophy, but for those who haven't, I hope this will be helpful in understanding what the study of philosophy is all about. When you look at the word philosophy, you'll see that it has two Greek roots: philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy is literally the love of wisdom, and a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. Now, what do we mean by wisdom? Well, it's a term that doesn't have a precise meaning, so for the sake of discussion, I'm just going to stipulate a meaning that suits our purposes. Wisdom, I think we can all agree, involves knowledge. But we want to distinguish the knowledge that the wise person has from mere information or mere knowledge of empirical facts. So here's my slogan definition. To have wisdom is to have knowledge of the true and the good. And to act wisely is to act on the basis of this knowledge. Now, this isn't the only way to define wisdom, but it's helpful for us because it captures something that's distinctive about philosophical wisdom, the wisdom associated with philosophical insight or understanding. So let's unpack this slogan a bit further. Wisdom involves knowledge of the true. This expression, the true with a capital T, is just a shorthand for reality, the way things actually are behind the scenes. Wisdom also involves knowledge of the good, and by that I mean knowledge of what has intrinsic value and therefore worth pursuing for its own sake. I'm actually using this as an umbrella term for anything having to do with values and ultimate goals. So putting this all together, the wise person has knowledge of reality, the way things really are, and knowledge of what is ultimately good and valuable, and is willing and able to act and make decisions in accordance with this knowledge. So, the philosopher I'm suggesting is someone who loves and pursues this kind of wisdom. But we can't be done yet, because if we just leave it at this, then there are lots of people who would qualify as philosophers who we wouldn't normally want to place in this category. Philosophy as a discipline is devoted to the pursuit of wisdom, but it's not the only game in town. There are other professions, other disciplines, other intellectual traditions that are also in the wisdom game, who claim to have wisdom, to have a deep knowledge of the true and the good. I'm thinking here specifically of two traditions. One is the tradition of Western religion that focuses on revelation as the primary means of acquiring wisdom. In this tradition, and here I'm trying to be specific, in the tradition of revealed religion, wisdom is given to human beings. It's revealed to us through divine acts, like the divinely inspired writing of texts, like the books of the Old and New Testament Bibles or the Quran, or sometimes through visions or personal communication with a divine presence of some kind. Either way, human beings themselves aren't responsible for this wisdom. Human beings didn't work it out for themselves by deliberation and reason. It's delivered to us. Now, in this context, we wouldn't describe this wisdom as philosophical wisdom, as a product of philosophical reflection. So we should distinguish this sort of revealed wisdom from the wisdom that might be obtained through philosophical inquiry. Now, the other wisdom tradition that I'm thinking of is the one we associate with various forms of mysticism. Now, I'm not comfortable generalizing and lumping together all forms of mysticism, but for our purposes, I sort of have to. But all I'm talking about is those traditions where the goal is some form of enlightenment, an awareness of deep metaphysical truths. And this enlightenment is experienced as a form of direct intuition or insight, a conscious awareness of a deep, ultimate, transcendent reality. And where the methods for attaining this state of awareness don't involve primarily rational argumentation, but rather various forms of disciplined practice like meditation or other ways of getting your mind to transcend the rational ego so that your mind becomes suitably receptive to this irrational, not irrational, but a-rational awareness. The wisdom that comes out of this tradition, I want to say, should be distinguished from the wisdom that comes from philosophical reflection. So what exactly is the secret sauce that makes for philosophical wisdom? Well, in a nutshell, the secret sauce is rational argumentation. In philosophy, the primary means by which wisdom is acquired is through rational argumentation, which is an inherently public and social activity. Someone offers reasons for holding a belief. These reasons are presented in some public way, through speech or writing, so that anyone could, in principle, examine them and assess them. Objections are raised, replies are offered, and so on, and the dialectic evolves over time. This is the tradition that begins with the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers. This is the tradition that flourishes with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. This is the tradition that continues into the medieval era with Augustine and Anselm and Aquinas and many others. This is the tradition associated with the writings of Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, Russell, Wittgenstein, and so on, up to the present day. There may not be much that all these philosophers agree upon, but argumentation is central to their methodology. Logic and argumentation are central among the tools that philosophers use to construct and evaluate their views. So having said all that, let's go back to our main question. What is the relationship of critical thinking to the pursuit of philosophical wisdom? And the answer is, it's central to the pursuit of philosophical wisdom. Logic and argumentation are key elements of critical thinking. It's like asking, what is the role of mathematics in the practice of physics? The answer is everything. It's foundational. Mathematics is the language through which the claims of physical theories are expressed. Logic and argumentation and critical thinking are to philosophy what mathematics is to physics. If you're ignorant of the former, then you simply can't understand what's going on in the latter, much less contribute to it. So that's my final word on the importance of critical thinking. If you have any interest in reading or understanding what philosophers have written and said about the big questions, then you'll need to acquire some basic critical thinking skills. And if you want to think critically and independently about the big questions for yourself, it's unavoidable. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I want to offer a few disclaimers and qualifications, since I know if I leave it here, I'll get jumped on, especially by my YouTube audience, who usually don't let anything slip by. Number 1. Nothing that I've said here implies sharp boundaries between philosophy, religion, and mysticism. In each of these, you'll find overlap and interpenetration. There are philosophical traditions in every branch of Western religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that focus on argumentation. There are philosophical traditions in every branch of Eastern religion. There are also mystical traditions within every branch of Western religion. And there are plenty of philosophers within the Western tradition that have been influenced by various forms of revealed religion or mysticism. Nothing that I've said here implies anything to the contrary. Number 2. Nothing I've said here implies that the philosophical approach to wisdom is superior to the religious or the mystical, or that the philosophical approach is incompatible with revealed religion or mysticism. That may or may not be true, and we'll talk more about this in later episodes, but I'm just saying that nothing I've said here entails a position on this one way or another. Number 3. Nothing that I've said here implies any particular philosophical position on any particular question. In particular, it doesn't rule out various forms of skepticism. It may be that the rational pursuit of wisdom leads us to conclude that our knowledge of the true and the good is extremely limited, that we can't know the true and the good with any certainty. But that too would be a kind of wisdom, wouldn't it? The wisdom of knowing that you don't know, and maybe can't know. This kind of thinking has a long and venerable pedigree in philosophy too. But there's no need to prejudge such questions. I promise we'll talk more about this in later episodes too. And finally, number 4. Nothing I've said here implies that all philosophers have the same views about the role and importance of logic and argumentation in philosophy. There are some philosophical traditions that want to problematize logic itself, and some that view the goal of philosophy as something quite different from the search for wisdom in any traditional sense of that word. But I really don't think the existence of these sorts of philosophical traditions undermines much of what I've said here. Philosophers who hold these critical positions typically don't go around saying that they came to them through some mystical insight or by the revealed word of God. They hold these positions because they've thought about them, they've subjected them to rational scrutiny, and they try to convince others through rational discourse of one form or another. And in this respect, we're all playing on the same field, if not always following the same rules. Okay, that wraps up the show. I'd like to thank you for listening if you're catching this on iTunes, or watching if you're viewing the video version on YouTube. If you're an iTunes listener and would like to see the video version, go to YouTube and search for my YouTube user ID, which is Philosophy Freak, all one word. And you'll find all the podcasts in a playlist on my YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube and would like to subscribe to the audio version on iTunes and download episodes to your MP3 player, just search for The Critical Thinker in iTunes and you'll find it. Next episode, I'm starting a new series called The Elements of Critical Thinking, where I'll talk about what I think should belong in every well-stocked critical thinking toolkit.